friends. Welcome to the podcast Shedding Candlelight on Cryptids, Hauntings, Mythology, and more. If it is weird, we are talking about it. This is your hot and sweaty, still not living in my new house host, Lidana. In honor of the tomfoolery that has been enraging me for pretty much the entirety of 2024, we are today going to take a little dip back into some Norse mythology with the quick witted god of mischief himself, the one and only Loki. As with all mythology, stories and even names evolve with time as each new generation and or geographical location add to, take away from, hone in on, or dial down on a particular element of the original myth. This could be a personality trait, a strength, a weakness, an accomplishment, or any other manner of attribute. In large part, these evolutions are due to changing social attitudes. And while these changes in people's perspectives can happen for many reasons, some of the big catalysts are typically the rise or fall of nations and the rise of one religion over another, with those rises and falls in religions often coming on the heels of a nation being conquered. Having said that, a good and modern basic reference for these types of mythological evolutions would be zombies and vampires. In the very early days of recorded history, there were no zombies or vampires. There were creatures with traits of both, but there was no separation with specific traits that would fall in line with what the average person today would describe as being a zombie specific trait or a vampire specific trait. Over the course of time, and as people began to fear or revere certain qualities, new monster names emerged. And from there, we continued to hone in on specific attributes of these monsters, giving them the distinct qualities that most of us have come to love or despise. Some people like a vampire who glitters in the sunlight. Others, like me, want them to burn to a crisp. So long as there are witches who can cast spells and give magical charms that let a few of the villainously heroic bad boy vampires walk amongst us. Klaus Michelson, anyone? So, history and myth are convoluted, messy, and often vague. It's hard to know what event might have actually happened that could have prompted people to tell stories that would later be thrown together to create a particular myth. Furthermore, once the idea of something is loose and running through the collective database of the human population, we get the human population manipulating the facts and not always intentionally. But whether or not a story was changed out of a fear response, social pressure, bias, bigotry, or just to make the story more fun, we find ourselves in modern times unable to get a succinct answer as to where stories originated and what elements of them are true. Therefore, as we move through today's story, know that I have done my best to bring you what I believe to be the oldest bits of Loki's particular mythology. If you know something different, that's quite okay. Most of us will probably agree on the fact that Loki is one of the most misrepresented gods. Historically, Loki has been painted as evil or bad. He's the enemy of righteousness, the disruptor of order, the harbinger of chaos. However, when I read his story, I see Loki wearing these negative badges only because he is more clever and cunning than all of the other gods, the Norse ones at least. Loki is a problem solver and a man of action, while the other Norse gods are more interested in not getting their superficial hands dirty, unless it is to use their power to smite people, a decision they typically make after someone bruises their self important egos. Our brave Loki is not so self focused, though, and he does not have a problem getting his hands dirty. Loki is a go getter. And yeah, sometimes you have to go get yourself into some trouble in order to figure out 1,000 ways not to do something like, say, make a light bulb. But trying and not succeeding is not failure. Failure is only possible when one chooses never to try. That's my motivational TED Talk for the day because Loki may be the trickster god of chaos, but Loki is at the top of his class when it comes to effort and ambition. He's so much more robust than a war god with a hammer who is just going to gripe and complain without ever bothering to offer a solution that does not include mass murder. Therefore, Loki is the hero I want in my story. So let us get into his origin and see how this true hero of both God and man came to be. There is little written about Loki's early life, and no one really knows how he came to be friends with the god Odin or exactly why Loki himself was even elevated to full god status. In other religions and mythology, Loki would have been a demigod at best because Loki is the son of Farbati, a giant whose name means he who strikes dangerous blows. Loki's mother, though, is a goddess. Her name is Laufey, and she is also known as Needle or Nal because she is very thin, slim, trim, and extremely beautiful. Nal is also very sharp witted and cunning. So we know where Loki gets his clever problem solving or sometimes problem causing mind. Outside of his parentage, the only other things we know or that we can infer is that Loki is born of Odin because, according to Norse mythology or early Norse religion, Odin is the father of all of us, hence his nickname as the Allfather. Odin's origin story includes how he and his two brothers created the world and how Odin himself breathed the breath of life into logs, making two humans who then went on to populate the earth. It's basically the traditional God created the world, made people from the dust of the earth, and breathed the breath of life into them. Odin's story just predates the oldest known written records of the biblical creation story. And with the addition of Odin's two brothers being part of Odin's original story, you also have a representation of the biblical Holy Trinity, if you so choose to see it that way. At the very least, I think it is interesting. I have heard some religious scholars waxing poetic about how most, if not all, religions are regurgitations of the same stories. And again, I say it's all very interesting indeed. Like maybe we could stop fighting about religious differences because they are all bastardized versions of the same thing. That's just a viewpoint of this negative Nelly. For Loki, though, he also has two brothers, the same as Odin. But despite Loki being counted among the major Norse gods, his two brothers are not. However, in Norse mythology, it is said that Odin and Loki are blood brothers, which is a type of bond that held great significance in Viking communities and in Norse mythology. This type of brotherhood was one based on mutual respect and also on shared obligations or shared fate. Think of a brotherhood of knights, for instance. The knights might not like each other on a personal level, but they all share a common cause. Becoming a blood brother would require some sort of pact or ritual oath, and it's said that Odin and Loki made such a blood brother pact because Odin recognized himself in Loki. They shared such traits as being wise and cunning. Odin can also be quite meddlesome, so he saw Loki's penchant for mischief as yet another matching trait. Loki, with his magical abilities that we'll talk about later, was also a balance to Odin's all knowing, powerful rule of Asgard. Therefore, Odin entered into this symbolic brotherhood with Loki because he had a respect for Loki. The pair cut their hands, mixed their blood, and swore loyalty to one another, forming an unbreakable bond to represent their equality, their trust in one another, and their mutual support. Now, there are and were dire consequences for breaking a blood bond, such as what Loki and Odin entered into. The expectation between blood brothers is that they will not break the oath they made, that they will keep secrets for their brother, come to their brother's aid whenever needed, and more importantly, defend their brother even at the cost of their own life. Not having their brother's back was a grave offense, one punishable by law in Viking communities. And it did not matter if the blood brother oath was accidentally broken. A break was a break, and once committed, it was an affront that required some form of restitution because to the Norse, as well as some other cultures, these brotherhoods transcended friendship or duty. They were sacred bonds that were acknowledged by the gods themselves and therefore carried far reaching consequences, ranging from monetary fines to the most severe physical punishments. And yes, death was among those consequences. So let's look at a couple of specific blood oaths. Warriors in Norse lands would form a blood bond called by a name that I shall not dare to attempt to pronounce. If you are watching the video version, I will put the word up on the screen for you. In this blood oath, the warriors would make cuts in various places on their bodies and just allow their blood to freely mix. In some Viking communities, people would perform rituals such as drawing images in the earth to symbolize their purposes and then cutting their palms to drip and mix their blood into the earthen image as a symbol of their blood oath to one another. Other groups would go a bit further by cutting their palms and then mixing their blood into a wine filled goblet. After that, each man forming the bond would then drink from the goblet. This particular bond was limited in use. People were only allowed to make this oath to three others because it was believed that bonds with more people ran the greater risk of loyalties and trust being broken. The way Loki and Odin broke their oath to one another many times, which led to them having a strained relationship because the Viking communities took these oaths of honor very seriously. Their word was their honor, so breaking your duty to the oath was punishable in various ways. Should your bonded brother seek justice, the legal implications for the wrongdoing could include anything from fines, flogging, imprisonment, loss of titles, properties or inheritance, ostracization, and even death. In short, a Viking oath once given was expected to be kept at any cost. In fact, Viking societies viewed betrayal of blood oaths as such a breach of honor that they believed breaking the oath would draw the wrath of the gods. So, individuals daring to break an oath were not only running the risk of losing trust and respect within their communities, but they ran the risk of being cursed by one or more god. So it's easy to see why the betrayal of a blood oath shattered trust and created major disruptions in the fabric of Norse societies. It is equally easy to see why honor was so crucial. It's still crucial today, but well, being that I'm currently full of negative energy, we will move on and spare us all from my cynical rant. With Viking societies so willing to uphold the sanctity of a blood oath, and that bond extending well beyond the mortal plane, with some believing the gods would ensure that a cursed oathbreaker continued to be tormented for his failures even after death, why would the gods themselves dare to enter into this type of bond? In the case of Loki and Odin, no one really knows why the duo decided to become blood brothers. Aside from the commonalities that I cited earlier, and Odin very clearly having respect for Loki and seeing him as an equal, it isn't very clear why Odin would make such an offer to Loki. Because let's face it, Odin had way more to lose than Loki did, and the latter was certainly a thorn in the Allfather's side. You might say Odin got more than he bargained for when he entered into a blood brothership with Loki. because of their outright betrayals of one another and even their unintentional oath breaking, their relationship was strained at best. Still, it was Loki's close relationship with Odin that got Loki himself to be counted among the major Norse gods. Being counted among them, though, does not mean that the other gods saw Loki as their equal the way Odin did. With Loki's giant lineage and giants being a favorite enemy of the gods, Loki's position among the Norse gods is complicated. Many of them consider Loki to be too unpredictable because he doesn't follow all of the rules or do things the way the rest of them are apt to do. However, I don't think Loki's actions come out of left field or stand out as being ungodly. I think that while some of his actions are extreme and certainly intended to cause harm, Loki, for the most part, is simply reacting to wrongs committed against him and usually by the other gods. Many of them resent Loki. They don't like his close relationship to Odin, and they are not fond of what they consider Loki's loose claim to godship. This makes Loki an easy target. There's a saying that is something to the effect of nothing brings people together like mutual hatred. You can see this scenario play out in pretty much any group setting. The group always tends to need one person to ostracize. I don't get it, but that's the way humans are. And according to the stories written about them, it is absolutely the way the gods are. Also, I do not think it is a leap to assume that the other gods resent Loki's easygoing nature because when they orchestrate moves against him, Loki typically gets even by outwitting the other gods in a way that often embarrasses them, which means Loki has a good laugh, and so does anyone not on the receiving end of Loki's revenge. This laughter and easygoing nature is then what Loki can use to diffuse the situation after his point of superiority has been made. We've all been in situations where either ourselves or someone else is humiliated, but it's funny, so everyone else laughs despite the emotionally wounded person still being upset. If the embarrassed party tries to go venting about the wrong that was done to them, everyone advises them to just get over it. So without any support, they do. This doesn't mean that they stop harboring ill emotions or thoughts, though. So, situations like this cause resentment to build, and eventually Loki then becomes the scapegoat for every bad thing, as in the case of Thor's missing hammer. Loki did not steal it, and he wasn't even the one who suggested Thor dress up like a bride to go get the hammer back from the giant who stole the hammer to begin with. However, over time, the story became just that. Loki painted as a hammer thief and a mastermind of the plan to retrieve the hammer that he stole. Loki did delight in playing tricks on the other gods, though, and I'm sure he gave himself bonus points if his pranks caused utter chaos. Like the time when he shaved the head of Thor's wife, it was a cruel move on Loki's part, no matter how much he tried to say it was intended only to be a funny prank. He did, however, replace the locks he stole with lovely strands of pure gold that grow just like normal hair. Thor and his wife were both happy with this upgrade, and it was actions such as these that allowed Loki to become this master of trickery, one who could easily blur the line between friend and foe. Which brings us to Loki's magical abilities. He could shapeshift, which came in real handy when the other gods needed him to solve some sort of problem for them. In a way, this ability to shapeshift made Loki invaluable to the gods, whether they liked that fact or not. Some even despised Loki for his ability, but still they used him when they felt it was necessary. Like the time when a mysterious builder offered to construct a strong, high wall around Asgard to protect the realm of the gods from the giants and other threats. And the confident builder said it would only take him 3 seasons to complete the project. This builder, who was a giant himself, said he would build the wall in exchange for a few simple things. Number one, he wanted the goddess Freya. She was beautiful and highly sought after, so he thought it would be a good idea to have her for himself, along with the sun and the moon. No big deal, right? A goddess and a couple of heavenly bodies. Well, that's what the gods of Asgard thought too. In fact, Loki himself said the builder's demands were not a big deal. All the gods had to do was put stipulations into the contract that ensured the gods would get at least a portion of a wall built for free and without consequences. So they told the builder they would meet his demands if he could build the wall in one single winter and with no help from anyone else. The builder was only allowed to use his horse. Now, the builder was not happy, but he agreed to the terms, and the gods sat back and watched as their wall began to take shape. Weeks passed, and the builder progressed much more rapidly than the gods had anticipated. This made them anxious. And then, 3 mere days before the end of winter, they realized this amazing builder was actually going to complete his impossible task on time. All that was left to be completed was for the builder to set the stones around the gate. The rest of the wall was finished. Freya was beside herself, and the gods threatened to kill Loki if he did not fix this problem because it was him who had talked them into making this counteroffer to begin with. But Loki had been paying attention, and in order for the builder to set those final stones, he would need his horse to carry said stones from the forest to the gate. So Loki's solution was simple. He transformed into a beautiful female horse and lured the builder stallion away. The builder waited, but his horse did not return in time, and he was not able to finish the wall by winter's end. Once the contract the gods had made with the builder expired, Thor killed the builder. Not because he failed at his task, but because the gods had promised the builder he would be safe in Asgard while he worked. The second winter was over. The predictable mass murderer disguised as a god killed the giant who was skilled enough to do something the gods themselves apparently could not. So, yeah, that made perfect sense. And it's why we should love all gods, really. I mean, because each of them usually has a people group you're supposed to loathe, condemned for the crime of simply being born with attributes you did not have a say in. Anyway, Loki, while still in his mare form, got busy with the stallion and later gave birth to Sleipnir, the 8 legged horse that became Odin's favorite mount, a horse with some magical qualities of its own. Loki also had other children. With his wife, he had 2 sons, Nari and Vali. With the giantess who was not his wife, he fathered Hel, the goddess of death and the ruler of the underworld, and Fenrir, a monstrous wolf destined to play a crucial role in Ragnarok. Loki also fathered Jormungandr, the massive serpent who encircles the human world of Midgard. So Loki is undeniably a fascinating character with some pretty impressive and important offspring. And right now, as far as we know, he is currently bound to a rock with the entrails of one of his own sons, where poison drips and burns his body, a punishment given to him by the other gods after he orchestrated the death of the god Balder. That is a story for Patreon and one that sets up Loki's role in the apocalypse known as Ragnarok. Suffice it to say that Loki has had quite enough of the gods. He will align himself with his monstrous children and confront the gods themselves in one final epic showdown that is much more complicated than good versus evil, because Loki is not the only god who likes to blur lines. He is, though, tragically, the blood brother of a god he must fight on the opposing side. Decide for yourself if you think Loki is an evil mastermind with a heart full of hatred, or if he might just embody the human condition, the unpredictable elements of chaos and peace that always seem to be at odds within us. I've long said that it is not true that most people are good. Most people, given the chance, are despicable. It's a self centered nature that has people lying, stealing, cheating, doing any old thing they want, so long as they have this perception that they are going to get away with it. Well, I've now heard police detectives say the same thing, that most people, given the chance and with them thinking they can do things in secret and not be found out, will do things that will shake you to your very core. So just think of those times when you tell little white lies and contemplate how often you yourself might be living in the gray zone. Loki certainly is not a conformist. He thinks for himself and, in my opinion, lives in the full spectrum of color. I think that's how it's supposed to go. None of us are perfect, so we should just give life our best shot and hope we don't end up tied to a rock. I kind of feel like I am tied to a rock these days. Glum is the word that comes to mind when I think of my mental state. So if you have something colorful and vibrant and wonderful happening in your life, or maybe your soul is just so full of joy that you are shining brighter than the sun the giant tried to bargain for, hit me up with an email. You can also tag me on social media so long as you know that I probably will not see whatever you posted. You can find me using some form of Lidana or Lidana author, and my email is lidonabooks@gmail.com. My website where you can purchase my thriller books or my one lonely little fantasy book is leadonabooks.com. Join me over on Patreon at patreon.com/Leadonna. And until next month, let's just all try to refrain from going all scorched earth into the world apocalypse. And also, don't kill giants. They are people too. Bye.
Immortal Monsters.